So a pleasant evening to all of us. We are the group 4 and our topic for today is all about morpheme order studies. So before I begin, I would like to give a brief definition between the morphology and the morpheme. So when we talk about morphology, it is the structure of words, while the morpheme, it is the smallest units of the study and in morphology. So as you can see on the screen, the definition. So according to Cambridge organization is that morpheme studies refers to the series of studies that have investigated that acquisition order grammatical morphemes by first and second language learners. The central question of these studies was whether learners show a universal pattern in the acquisition order of morpheme, which means that similar pattern of morpheme supply is found for first and second first and second language children from many languages background, interpreted as evidence for a natural order, and SLA or second language acquisition evidence for a natural order comes from studies of interrogatives and negations.
What theory of language or language learning influences morpheme order studies? From the abstract, morpheme order studies conform a highly influential studies in the field of first and second language acquisition. These studies were based on the assumption that there exists a universal and natural order for morpheme acquisition that all learners follow regardless of their background. Many theories have been proposed in the literature in order to explain how and in which order morphemes are acquired when learning an L2. During the 20th century, behaviorist theorists claimed that the acquisition of L2 morphemes was potentially influenced by our mother tongue. However, in the 70s, a new anatist perspective emerged with regard to this line of research. It suggested that there is a natural sequence of morpheme acquisition common to all L2 learners, regardless of their L1 and the type of instruction they have received. This assumption was endorsed by a set of studies which were conducted from 1970 onwards, and they were called morpheme order studies.
Good evening, I am Maria Aliana, and today I will be discussing the morpheme order studies, specifically its areas of concern. What language issues or problems that does it investigate? Morpheme order studies aim to investigate the acquisition of grammatical functions such as articles or inflectional features such as the plural s. Morpheme order studies refers to the series of studies that have investigated the acquisition order of the grammatical morphemes by first language and second language learners.
So the major proponent of this study, the morpheme order, can be traced to Sir Brown. So as you can see on the screen that Roger Brown in 1973 and De Villers in the same year, they dealt with the order of acquisition of these functions solely from the perspective of first language acquisition. So let's go first to Roger Brown. So Roger Brown, he studied the 3 children who were native speakers of American English. Its finding included the observation that the 3 children learned English morphemes in roughly the same order, although they did not acquire them at the same age. So I have a written copy here that according to Sir Brown, that some factor or some set of factors cause this grammatical morpheme to evolve in an approximately consistent order in these children, and he followed the SOC, which means the suppliance and obligatory context explanation that the grammatical morpheme are obligatory in certain contexts, and so one can set an acquisition criteria not simply in terms of output but in terms of output were required. Each obligatory context can be regarded as a kind of test item which the child passes by supplying the required morpheme or fails by supplying none or one that is not correct. So this performance measure the percentage of morpheme supplied in obligatory contests should not be dependent on the topic of conversation, on the character of the interaction. So this is one of the limitations of Brown's conditional study, was that it was based on observation of these three children only. So let's proceed to De Villers and De Villers. In the same year, the researcher used Brown 14 factors, his coding rules, to identify obligatory contexts. So in addition, these two researchers introduced a new ranking method. Even so, ang ilahang analysis is very similar to Sir Brown. So this method, rather than imposing a 90% cut-off level of acquisition, they simply rank the factors according to the relative accuracy with which they were used by the subject. So, Sir Brown's idea shaped much of subsequent research, including the research for the determinant and second language acquisition orders. So, speaking of second language acquisition, so let's proceed to Dolly and Bird in the same year, 1973. So as you can see on the screen, that on the other hand, these two researchers, they extend the research to encompass the second language acquisition. So Dolly and Burke found a consistent order across three groups of first language Spanish child learners of English. That is why this researcher decided to expand the study of morpheme. They proposed that there could be a certain universal sequence in the acquisition of second language English morpheme regardless of the first language. So Dolly and Bert also found that the pattern that the participants follow differs from the order proposed by Brown in the same year in the first language. So they claim that, I have a written copy here, that the older second language learner need not struggle with the same kinds of semantic notions already occurred in early childhood. So, sa ako ang pagsabot ani, so if duha ka buok imong, if more than 2 ang imong nahibaw-an nga language pagbata, okay, very easy ra kay nimo to use that particular languages kaysa karon nga dako na ka nga magkat-on ka, it's very hard. That is all.
I am Maria Aliana, and I will be discussing the morpheme order studies, especially its key assumption. What does it say about SLA or language learning in general? Morpheme order studies confirms the set of highly influential studies in a field of first and second language acquisition. There exists a universal and natural order formal theme acquisition that all learners of their background. Morpheme order studies in second language acquisition, according to Dooley and Burt in 1973, points out that the idea was to demonstrate the second language acquisition, or SLA, was not just a matter of learned response, but that individual developed second language competence according to a predictable series of benchmarks.
So how does Morphem Order Studies conduct its investigation? So the process of Morphem Order Studies involves in determining whether second language learner had followed a natural acquisition of grammatical morphemes like what the first language learner does. So in this method, researchers conducted a study to test whether second language learners had followed a natural acquisition of grammatical morphemes. So as a result, the researchers collect a collection of sample to those children with high proficiency levels and whose native languages were not English but Spanish and Chinese. So the results acquired from the research is that children still followed a natural acquisition of order like what the first language learner does. So, ang second language learner nagyapag-follow na order sa pag-learn o grammatical morphemes sa English. So, when we say second language learner, mo na sila yung mga tao nga ga-learn og ikaduha na language. So here is the table that indicates the morpheme acquisition order of the first language learner and the second language learner. So on the left side, mo ni siya ang acquisition order sa first language learner. So this was provided by Roger Brown. So si Roger Brown mo ni siyang provide sa baseline information of the tracking of the sequence of the acquisition order sa first language learner. He also stated na ang grammatical morphemes sa first language learner is consistent. Dili siya pabago-bago. Kung mao yung order, mao ra jud siya. So sa right side mo ni siya ang numbering order of the acquisition of grammatical morphemes sa second language learner, which was conducted by Dooley and Burt. Sumuni siyang result sa katong study nga ilang gitest ang proficiency level sa bata nga ilang first language kay Spanish ug Chinese. So parehas tag order of acquisition ang Spanish ug Chinese. Parehas na siya. They were virtually the same. Second is to explain the internally driven processes. So the researchers who were Dooley and Burt concluded that the second language learners are neither merely imitating what they hear nor necessarily transferring their first language to new code, but subconsciously create mental grammar to interpret and produce inferences that they not have before. So as what stated by these two researchers, it's not about in learning our second language. It's not about mo tanakatun-ana because we imitate what we hear, nor gibase na to ang structure sa second language sa ato ang first language. It's not about that two reasons. But, ingon nila, we subconsciously create mental grammar to interpret and produce utterances. We unintentionally make our mental grammar to interpret and produce utterances. So, for instance, like mag-speak like English towards to others, towards to who we are socializing with. We do not mind our grammars. We do not mind if the sentences we are uttering are ungrammatical, because the point of speaking English is not about how we structure our English, but it's about how we make others understand of what we are speaking. So this method rejects the claim nga tungod sa first language mota nagka-error sa second language. Mota naka-create of errors, especially in using grammatical morphemes. Third is to determine what grammatical morphemes does the second language learner acquired earlier and what grammatical morphemes are acquired relatively later. So in this table, we can see that there are many researchers who conducted second language learner studies in terms of the acquisition order of the grammatical morphemes. So, to those children whose native languages are Spanish and Chinese, we can see that the grammatical morphemes that they have acquired earlier are articles, copula, and progressive, while the grammatical morphemes that they have acquired later are the past irregular and the long plural. Same goes to the those adults who speak Spanish, non-Spanish, Arabic, Japanese, and Persian. They have also grammatical morphemes that they've acquired earlier, and they have also grammatical morphemes that they have acquired relatively later. So they have the same, they follow the natural order acquisition order of grammatical morphemes, but they differ on what grammatical morphemes they have acquired earlier and what grammatical morphemes they have acquired relatively later.
Good day everyone, my name is Kim J. Azarella and I'm here to tackle about the two sample studies related on the approaches about the morpheme order studies. So without further ado, let's start. So the first studies that I will tell you is that entitled The First Language Influence on the Acquisition Order of an English Grammatical Morphemes, the Learner Corpus Studies. So in abstract, we revisit morpheme studies to evaluate the long-standing claim for a universal order of acquisition. We investigate the second language acquisition order of a 6 English grammatical morphemes by learners from the 7 first language groups across 5 proficiency levels. Data are drawn from approximately 10,000 written exam scripts from the Cambridge Learner Corpus. This study establishes clear first language influence on the absolute accuracy of a morphemes, and there is acquisition order, therefore challenging the widely held view that there is a universal order of acquisition of a second language. Morphemes, or moreover, we find that the first language influence is morpheme to be specific, with morphemes encoding language. So, specific concept most vulnerable to the first language influence. So as far as I'm concerned, that the use of grammatical morphemes, which are traditionally defined in linguistics as a minimal units of meaning, okay? So in connection to the studies about the first language influence of the acquisition order of English grammatical morphemes, is that we compare the connection and influence between the first language and the second language if there is a natural order or universal order from the morpheme studies, which means that the study said that the second language followed the universal order while the first language followed the natural order. Even though that the first language and the second language there's a quite different and similarity in it, but at the same as usual that they follow same order the way we use our grammatical morphemes or the studies of our morphemes. That's it. Next sample studies is a morpheme order studies, a descriptive study in English as a second language. So in abstract, morpheme order studies, or MOS, conform a set of highly influential studies in the field of the first and second language of acquisition. These studies were based on the assumption that there exists on the universal and the natural order for morpheme acquisition that all learners follow regardless of their background. Okay, the result of this study is that revealed that the students did not follow accurately Krashen's natural order, and the existence of the various caused by interlingual transfer of the corroborated the first language. Therefore, the students of the first language seems to have affected the natural order of acquisition of the morphemes. So in connection to the two studies that we are, again, the connection of these two studies is that morpheme order studies was really useful to identify two similarities between the natural order and the universal order between the first language and the second language in studying morpheme order studies. That would be all. Thank you.